Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, you're a founder, CEO who's looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. This is Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. Mike Weinberg joins us today from St. Louis. Mike's a consultant, speaker, and has recently authored his third book, Sales Truth. Both of his first two books have been Amazon bestsellers, and Mike has spoken and consulted on 5 continents in the past year. Mike, thanks for joining the podcast.
Oh my gosh, Mike, thank you for having me.
Well, I am really excited. And as people know, the host of the podcast is Jody Mayberry. He is a huge St. Louis Blues fan, and they have finally made it to the Stanley Cup after 40 years. So I'm imagining, are you a Blues fan?
You know what? I have become a Blues fan. I'm more of a baseball, football guy, but this town is just upside down about the St. Louis Blues, and they have been very, very patient, these dedicated, loyal fans. And frankly, this city could use a win between losing the Rams and having the Cubs all of a sudden be better than the Cardinals. So there's a lot at stake for St. Louis on this Blues Stanley Cup Finals. So yes, I'm for the Blues.
Awesome. We had some neighbors over the other day, and they said that seeing a Cardinals game in St. Louis, it's an experience that you have to have. And we're actually talking with them about potentially making a trip out there to go see the Cardinals play, whomever it is that they play. But I guess the stadium's just amazing.
Yeah, it's like a religious experience. I mean, the city is about baseball. And I came from New York, and I was a Mets fan growing up. And it took me about 2 years of living here, and I just converted. I'm like, I get it. This is home. I'll root for the Cardinals. And it's pretty easy to be a St. Louis Cardinal fan, and you'll love going to a game. Love it.
Awesome. So I was actually born out on the island. I'm a lifelong Jets fan and Islander fan. Where were you in New York?
Oh my gosh. I was born in Queens.
Okay.
And I grew up in Rockland County, but I have all my friends are from the island from going to school in Albany. So I'm regularly out visiting my college buddies out at every exit on the LIE. So
that is awesome. Well, so thanks for, you didn't join the podcast to talk sports. We're here to talk sales, and you've got a new book coming out. What's the name of your book?
Sales Truth.
And why'd you choose Sales Truth as a title?
I've kind of carved out a little place for myself in the sales improvement world as the guy that will tell you the truth even when it hurts a little bit. And you had Anthony Anarino, who's a dear friend of mine and a mentor in many ways to me. You had him recently on your program, and he nicknamed me the Honey Badger, and basically said, I'm going to tell you the truth, and it may hurt, but that I take a lot of pride in exposing the lies in this business and the industry. And there are a lot of false teachers right now preaching a lot of crazy nonsense in this business. And I felt like I was in a position, because of my client base and because of the success of the previous books, to write the book I wanted to write and expose the myths and the nonsense in the sales industry, and then share the real truth about what today's best salespeople are doing to become master opportunity creators, to stay out of the procurement pit, and to win more new sales. And that's why I wrote this book.
So people are out there saying, okay, well, give us some truths. But before we do that, I've got to go back to a quote that I heard you say. And I can't remember specifically where this came from, but it might have even been one of Jeff Shore's podcasts. But it's not your fault, but it is your problem. And actually, I think that was from one of your books that you had that as a quote. So what does that mean to you?
It's interesting. And no one ever asked me about that. Jeff did years ago, and it was a great conversation. It means that the water is poisoned. And buyers have a perception of salespeople because other morons have been there before you, and they spoiled it. They wasted buyers' times. They had low integrity. They ran pathetic sales calls. They did the show up and throw up thing. They were manipulative. They made false promises. So there's this, typical sales resistance, anti-sales reflex that most corporate buyers and business folks have against salespeople. And it's not our fault, because I don't sell that way. My clients don't sell that way, but other people do. So you're up against the reality that buyers have this reflex reaction to resist you. And you need to do a lot of things in your approach, in your attitude, in your voice tone, in your language that lower that defense shield that buyers put up. And if you're not aware of that, it's really hard to set yourself apart. That there is this automatic resistance, and you need to know it's there, because you're living in that environment where people are predisposed against salespeople. And I'm on a mission to help upgrade the sales profession, and you got to be aware that's happening when you're in sales mode.
Yeah, and you go through like these quick fixes and shortcuts that quote unquote sales experts are out there pontificating. It kind of perpetuates this challenge and some of the negative stuff that's out there in the market, the negative perception, because People see it work once, or maybe they got lucky, whatever it is, but it's like me when the Islanders win. If I'm wearing blue socks, all of a sudden I'm wearing blue socks every time the Islanders are playing again. So why is it that we fall victim to these traps and this idea of shortcuts or quick fixes?
Yeah, I mean, it could go so many ways with this conversation. I think one of the reasons is the sales mentors of yesteryear are just not there right now. I give a ton of my credit to my own sales success to those that invested in me and mentored me in the formative stages of my career. I had managers and executives that I felt like personally cared about my development. They were building themselves into me. They were giving me some level of discernment, and they didn't let you fall for shortcuts and cheap tricks and always hunting for some secret sauce or magic bullet, right? They made you understand the fundamentals and they drilled them into you. And I think today we have a bunch of salespeople. I mean, I would venture to say that the majority of the sales population today is under-mentored and under-coached. So they're more gullible, and I think they're more susceptible to stupid teaching. And in today's world, I'm sure we'll get into this a little deeper, because there is no barrier to entry to being a, open quotes, thought leader or sales expert. All you need is a LinkedIn following, and you could publish all the nonsense in the world you want, get a lot of likes, and be considered a voice to follow. But what you're preaching is heresy and nonsense and lies that tickle the ears of people that want to hear it, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective. So I think when you put together the lack of mentoring and the fact that anybody with a keyboard and access to a website could be considered a sales expert today, it breeds trouble. And that was some of the motivation as well for doing the book, because I felt like someone had to clear the air and call out some of the nonsense for what it is. And I was willing to take that risk because I'm secure in who I am in the business, and I wasn't trying to impress anybody here. I felt like someone needs to tell the salespeople the truth. And if you've been deceived, then it's really helpful with someone on the other side and go, hey, maybe the folks you're listening to and the nonsense you're reading isn't helping you. Why don't we take a step back and look at that?
Yeah, and one of the quotes in the book, you've got, follow the lead of those having the most success in similar roles. Watch what top producers in your company or industry are doing to secure early stage meetings with potential customers and mimic their approach. How can mimicking help us?
Yeah, well, I think it's simple. I think you watch what people who are really successful do, and then you do the same thing. I did that early in my career. And even as I got going, when I would try something new and it would work, I'd replicate it. You try it once, it worked, try it again, work, do it 3 times, it works. I'm like, okay, I got a new theory. I'm going to implement this. Where I wrote that in the book, I was being very intentional, because there are morons in my business. And the specific thing I was talking about there, where they like to preach that every salesperson should be putting out IP and writing content and blogging. And that in order to be credible and trusted as a salesperson today, you need to put out your own content. And I take issue with that for a number of reasons. Number one is I don't see a lot of top salespeople that actually do that. And that's where that comment came. Why don't you look what people in your industry are doing? The other thing is that a lot of salespeople, that's not their best gift. Creating custom content and writing isn't what they do. I read a lot of salespeople's emails and proposals, and I would tell you, I don't think asking them to write articles is probably the best use of their time, when they would be better off picking up the phone and calling someone asking for a meeting. So I'm very hesitant when popular voices say, hey, you should all be creating content, because that's what I do as a consultant. So follow my lead. And I'm like, well, if you're not a consultant and people aren't paying you for your own IP, maybe you'd be better off with some traditional methods like phoning and prospecting and referral seeking, and the way most top producers in industries that I consult and coach are bringing in their business. That's where that mimicking comes from.
And it's amazing. You can pick up, what's the old saying? You could throw a stick and hit, tons of whatever, and you insert your Mad Lib component there. But in the context of LinkedIn, you could throw a stick and hit 10 people who say cold calling's dead, and hit another 10 people who say cold calling is alive and that's all that you should be doing. Why do we gravitate toward these myths around things being alive or things being dead or things? Why do the myths pull us together like a blue light or a mosquito to a blue light?
Boy, I've never heard it asked that way. That is so deep, Mike, and so helpful. I don't know. I think I understand the motivation on both sides. I will tell you, there are some very hungry people in the social selling only camp. There's a whole camp of social only, inbound only, very loud voices. And I know that they're hungry because they don't have a lot of work. And they think it behooves them, if they scare the world into believing that traditional methods don't work, you should only use these new ways and be real connect online and perfect your LinkedIn profile and put out lots of content and make comments. And at the right time, when people are ready, they'll come to you. And this is where it gets weird for me. Like, I love social selling. I love social media. I benefit from it. But I would never tell you, like, don't, like I'm more on the traditional side on the telephone and prospecting. But I would never say don't use social selling. I'm like, use every means possible. My friend Jeb Blunt, who wrote Fanatical Prospecting, he's always joking, use smoke signals if you have to. Like, do whatever it takes to get someone's attention and get in front of them. So going back to your question, I think we get polarized, and these people preach that only one way works, and we end up in these camps, is because they're very biased and their agenda becomes transparent. And let me just do this. Let me take a minute and contrast an honest person and a dishonest person in the social selling space. I'm not going to name names, but one of the larger social selling training companies is very transparent that they use all means necessary to grow their own business. In fact, to sell their own social selling training services, they have salespeople that do outbound prospecting because they admit that social selling alone isn't going to fill their own funnel to sell social selling training. Like, they're very transparent. Even in the job ad they put out for a salesperson, they talk about you will be expected to deploy outbound prospecting techniques as you're selling these services. That's beautiful. It's transparent. It's honest. Contrast that with a moron in the industry who put up a post on LinkedIn late last year when I was writing the book, and it was just fortuitous timing for me. And it was a picture of himself taking a selfie in front of a Forbes magazine with Kylie Jenner on the cover. And he was highlighting the story that said she'll be the youngest person to get to $1 billion in net worth even faster than Mark Zuckerberg. And his argument was, can't you see, sales leaders, that social selling leads to real sales? Kylie Jenner didn't cold call her way to $1 billion in net worth. And I read that nonsense and I think, how desperate is this person to say to a bunch of sales executives, wow, you don't think social selling is real? Look at Kylie Jenner. She's your role model. I mean, I'd love to try to hold out that example to my defense contractor sales team, or my consulting client sales team, or my truck sales team, right? Or my big data sales team. Like, they're going to post selfies and they're going to become billionaires. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of polarization because people say stupid things trying to drive their own agenda and sell their own services. And I think it just created this weird dynamic in the industry right now where there's this polarization.
Why do you think we don't like looking at the data? Why do we, and really where I'm going with this question is more along this whole line of correlation is not necessarily causation. Epidemiological studies would tell you that people in Miami are born Catholic and Cuban and die Jewish and originated from New York. Just because some of the data may infer something, we don't take a critical thinking approach to analyzing that data to figure out, is it really true? Can we validate that? Can we test it? Are we interested in testing outside of our environment? Why is it that I guess the better question here is, why don't we apply critical thought when it comes to analyzing what works and what doesn't work in sales?
That's so good. I don't know the answer. I'll quote you, my friend Mike Schultz, who's the president of Rain Group, who put out a great study a couple years ago to combat the stupid 57% statistic that's been probably the most overused statistic in sales in the last 7 years, that, today's buyer goes 57% through the buying process before engaging with a salesperson. And I was having a conversation with Mike, who put out research debunking that statistic. And I asked him, why is that? Why do statistics get so misused and misapplied, and people don't want to think critically about, what, just like you asked me? And he quoted David Ogilvy, the great advertising guru, who basically said, many people use statistics and research like a drunkard uses a light pole. They just kind of lean against it, right? And then they use it inappropriately. He goes, the light is supposed to illuminate something. We're supposed to be looking deeper and looking for the causation and having critical thinking. But, in the sales world, people took that 57% statistic and manipulators put it on its head and started preaching stuff that the CEB people never intended when they did that study. I mean, there's a whole bunch of charlatans that have gone around for years telling people, well, don't pick up the phone and prospect. That doesn't work anymore because the data says buyers get 57% through their process before they're going to talk to you. Well, the second I heard that, I know that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I have clients that get meetings from calling people before they're even shopping. The only time that statistic is true in my world is when a lazy reactive salesperson sits on their butt and waits for a lead. But that's an example of just lazy manipulation. I can't answer your question. I don't know why. What's your take? Why are they not more thoughtful or not take everything at face value that they hear?
Mike, like you, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's that thinking is hard. Maybe it's that we want this easy button. Maybe it's that, hey, you know what? Somebody else has figured this out. So maybe I can take a shortcut and I don't need to do the work. I mean, I think of just raising kids. Like if we had the same challenges in our house right after the kids were born as we do today, now that they're 13 and 16, we wouldn't have made it. Like, there's this successive approximation that's happened over the years as those challenges get different. And I think people are just looking for an easy way out of this. And yeah, there are no easy buttons in this process. But I don't know. It's one if the kids could leave our house with two things. One is a high level of self-confidence, and two is a high level of self-awareness. Then I think we've done our job. I would add some other things to that, which is the ability to think critically, because I think that's a missing piece in society today. Maybe it's that we like to follow our own biases, but I don't know. And if anybody's listening to this and they have some ideas around why we all are sucked into that blue light, please share them with Mike and I. We'd be interested in your feedback.
Mike, that's so good. I love that your take on parenting and your big objectives for your kids. That's beautiful. You know, and as you were talking about getting sucked into the blue light, it made me think of something I wrote in the probably the most dangerous chapter I have in the book, where I basically gave a sales coach's perspective on the 2016 presidential election.
Yep.
And I stayed out of it politically, but I gave my take on why Trump won and why Hillary lost. And somewhere in there I wrote that, and this goes to the camps. It's kind of like CNN and Fox News. I can't watch either of them anymore because they don't even pretend that they're giving you the news. They are fully transparent about their overt bias. CNN sees one world and Fox News sees another world. And people watch the one they're comfortable with because it affirms their own biases and worldview. And, you know, neither are getting the straight truth, right? And I think that's the best analogy I'd come up with based on what you're saying. People have a bias and they hear someone preach something, and if it affirms it, they're going to, oh yeah, I'll go that way. And I think it's dangerous.
Well, and I think this is a good transition to get back into the book. There are a couple of chapters that I thought were really interesting. One of them is this whole idea of stop rushing to present and demo. And it drives me nuts when I see demo as a stage in a sales cycle. But I'm not even going to get it. I don't know that we need to go down that tangent. But why do we rush to present and demo?
It's a great question. I don't know. It doesn't work. I think someone in product or marketing or some dumb sales manager is probably keeping a tally of demos, and someone's getting some kind of attaboy or threatened if they don't hit some kind of metric for conducting demos or doing presentations. But, you know, just like in medicine, where you write a prescription before you do diagnosis, we would call that malpractice. In sales, doing a demo without doing discovery is sales malpractice. And I would make the case, and you know, you've had a great guest, you've had Anthony on, you know, and he's big on that. You know, what does it take to be a trusted advisor, right? You got to be trusted. Well, how can you trust someone who comes in pitch mode and clicks their way through feature? I love something Jim Keenan says in his book, Gap Selling, and he and I were chatting about this. He says his rule is really simple. No discovery, no demo. I mean, I stood up and applauded when I read that in his book. I'm like, that's exactly my feeling. You can't be perceived as a problem solver, as a consultant, as a value creator, if you come in and go, if you click here, this is what happens. And if you click here, this is what happens. And you can't tie it to any of the customer desired outcomes or what their current situation is, or how your solution is going to get them to some desired future state because you didn't learn anything about them. So I hate it. I think the moment you go into pitch mode prematurely, you're automatically getting thrown in the vendor/commodity seller box. And they're taking your feature set and your price and they're putting it on a spreadsheet. And I think it's the worst selling, one of probably the top 3 or 4 worst sales behaviors today is presenting and demoing prematurely. I'll pause there because I'd love you to talk about your feeling about demo because I could see you clearly have an opinion here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two pieces to this. One is if your demo looks the same each time you deliver it, just record it and let people go to YouTube. And then the second one is if you find yourself demoing something multiple times at different stages in the buying cycle or the customer decision-making process, yet you still want to have demo as one of your sales stages, then you've got to ask yourself, does it really belong? Like, did you really go backward 3 steps or 2 steps to do the demo again? Or, Is that just part of the general evolution? So those would be two kind of statements that I would make. If your demo looks the same, just record it and let your customer play it on their terms. And you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway. And then the second one is if you're continuing to deliver demos insight throughout your sales cycle, but you have it as a stage in the sales process that you're using for forecasting, then it probably doesn't belong there. So those would be my 2 points there.
I love it. Thank you. That's great. I'd encourage everybody to go back and listen to that one more time because that's powerful. If it's the same all the time, what do we need you for? What value are you bringing? Just record it. That's convicting. That's really good.
Thank you. So in chapter 15, you talk about 2 extraordinary sales professionals, not so extraordinary keys to success. What should folks take away from the examples that you share in that chapter?
Yeah, I wrote that chapter as intentionally as any, and I think it's probably one of my favorites. I'll give you the bottom line first. I want salespeople to read these not so extraordinary best practices of these 2 incredibly successful salespeople, because I want people to have hope that you too can achieve at that level. If there's anything I hope people get out of that chapter, it's that Tom and Ron, who have completely different personalities and sell in completely different industries, who are both number one in their industry, are successful because they execute the basics really well. And I interviewed them both. I know them both really well. And if you read that chapter, you see they have no secrets. They have no secrets. They've mastered the fundamentals. They work their ass off. They're super competitive. They know their own business. They know their competitors' business. They know their customers. They make selling personal. They do great discovery. They don't cut corners. They work ridiculous hours backstage, prepping and practicing so that when they're front stage in front of a prospect or a client, they're prepared and professional and sharp. It's just my hope is that sellers would read that and go, wow, that's what the very best do? I could do a lot of that. Those aren't such special people after all. So that's why I wrote the chapter. And the fact that I know both these guys and neither of them are my clients, which makes it even more fun. Like I can't take any credit. I have never taught a thing to Tom or Ron. One guy sells cars, number one guy in North America, and the other guy sells financial services to the biggest companies in the world from working for one of the biggest financial institutions in the world. And whether you're B2B or you're B2C or you're small company or big company, if you just took what I shared in those chapters about what those guys do to stay on top every year, I guarantee you'll have breakthrough change in your results. Like that's what that chapter was all about.
It amazes me how far we want to get away from the fundamentals and how far we want to get away from the basics and how we tend to forget that we're all just human beings, all kind of on this rock that's spinning around once every 24 hours. It rotates around itself. And once every 365 days, depending on leap year, it rotates around the sun. Yet we think that everything has to be so different. So why do we struggle? Why can't the gravity be to pull us more toward the basics instead of these quick fixes and shortcuts that continue to get thrown out there?
I think because it's not sexy and it requires work. A lot of the book, I even, put little interjections in there where I say, this doesn't get a lot of press because what I'm sharing here isn't sexy. This is basic work. There's nothing fun about it. The stories I tell you about the work that this car sales guy does, preparing cars on the lot so they're positioned in such a way that he can get to the one he wants quickly once he does his discovery and understands what's the right car for a person, right? Or the work that Ron does before he gets an entire team of people together for a massive presentation in a giant company's boardroom. The work that goes into that is painstaking. And people see that and they go, well, I don't want to do that. That's work. I want the easy button. So I think because it's not sexy and because it looks like work, people are not attracted to the basics. But that's why, I go ballistic when everyone's chasing the shiny bullet and looking for everybody's got FOMO, right? And they're online and they're looking for the newest hack. And I'm like, would you stop it? Like, I'm telling you this, and I mean this. The top salespeople I observe in my clients today, and I have a very eclectic group of clients, from defense to SaaS startups to multi-billion-dollar insurance brokerages and a big data company and heavy equipment, and it's on every type of industry. If I showed you the top salespeople across the board, they're not doing anything fancy, and they're not even doing that much that's new. The best practices they're deploying look a whole lot like the best practices of a decade ago or even more. They get into deals early. They own their account list. They ask great questions. They know their business. They're not afraid to challenge a client. They own their own process and don't default to procurement. They stay close to business people. They can really tell a good story and articulate value. I mean, those things are not new or interesting. Those are best practices that have been around forever. So that's my best take on it. Well, what's your take? Why is it people want to poo-poo the basics and always look for something fancy?
Well, I think you hit on the big one is that there are a lot of people out there that for whatever reason don't want to do work. They like to show the world that they're doing work, but they don't like to actually do work. It's like this is kind of dating us, but from a communication standpoint, but remember the big thing was, I've got X number of unread emails in my inbox. Like, okay, is there a badge for that? So I think there's a belief that a perception of being busy is more important than really being productive. And I don't really get it. I don't understand it. But that's my kind of initial off the cuff take, is that it's better to have the optics to make it look like you're busy and doing all of these things and trying all these new things and really innovating than it is to say, you know what, I just do the basics. I prepare. It's kind of like going to the gym, right? When I go to the gym, I know the path that I'm going to take up to the gym. I don't leave it up for chance. I don't go, okay, one of these 6 ways I'm going to get up there. I go, and then I go in there and I move weight around. And I move weight around based on the given workout that I'm doing in a given day. If I went in there and just kind of went, I wonder what today looks like, the likelihood of success diminishes significantly. But I think that is the thing that I really like about the thread that goes through this book, is if you start applying some common sense, basic ideas and concepts, fundamentals, you can be much more successful, whether that role is in a sales role, it's a learning and development role, it's launching a company, getting to these. There's a reason why the fundamentals are the fundamentals.
Amen, brother. Hey, can I pick up on something you started saying a minute ago? You were talking about the difference between being busy and being productive.
Yes.
And I will tell you, whether it's sales managers or salespeople, I see a lot of folks working 50, 60 hours a week, but never getting to the high value activities that actually move the needle.
Yep.
And especially in sales, I see people that live in their inbox and they look for customer service fires to put out, and they volunteer for committees. It's July 4th coming up right here in the States, and they want to be on the barbecue committee because they want to flip the hamburgers, and
yep,
they'll do anything to be a good corporate citizen or help out operations. Or in some of my more blue collar type sales clients, they look to run a delivery out to a customer because they want to have FaceTime. So it's a great excuse to spend 3 hours not selling, right? Because who could be mad at me if I'm bailing out a customer and bringing a part that they need to keep their factory running? Well, it all sounds good, except that's usually the person at the bottom of the ranking when it comes to developing new business. Like, you could be really busy and get to inbox 0 and appear like, you're working your ass off, and go through an entire week of 50, 60 hours and do very little proactive sales activity where you're initiating contact with a tough customer that's growable, but you don't really like them. Or you're trying to get a meeting with an ideal profile prospect, right, who you haven't been in to see ever or in a long time. So, you fill your day with service type work, and you seek out account management things, and you love the accolades that come when customers appreciate you, and you look like you're doing a great job retaining existing business, but that's not really sales. That sounds like glorified customer service to me. And I just wish, and I'd have a lot less business and I would be fine with it, honestly. I just wish salespeople would spend more time selling, because one of my biggest, and this is my biggest amusement, the money I get paid by companies to go in and tell a senior executive, the biggest freaking problem on your sales team is the people in charge of selling stuff don't spend enough time trying to sell stuff. They're working, but they're doing accounting, and they're preparing for invoicing, and they're getting back to customers on inventory challenges, right? Or they're playing on social media, but they're not calling people, and they're not conducting discovery meetings, and they're not out of the office seeing people. And that's what moves the needle for creating and advancing sales opportunities. So there ends my sermon, but it drives me crazy.
Is this just scope creep that they allow because they're procrastinating, or is it scope creep that they allow because the thing that they're getting measured on inside the organization aligns with some kind of vanity metric? What's your opinion on that?
Wow. It could be bad metrics and bad management. I'll take a different tact. I think there's a lot of people in sales roles that really aren't cut out to hunt for new business. Mm-hmm. They're wired like what I call zookeepers in my sales management book. And what I mean by that, a lot of people like to talk about hunters versus farmers. I use the phrase zookeepers to describe the account management minded salesperson, because the customer's alive and it has needs and it gets hungry and it complains and it poops that needs to get cleaned up and it gets sick and needs to go to the doctor. And there's a whole lot of people that are really good at that zookeeping part of selling. Customers love them. They're responsive. They care. They're relational. They're good with technical stuff. And they look for any kind of excuse not to go out and do the hard work of seeing the jerk customer who we have very little share with, or the non-customer, the prospect. So I think some of it is it's a DNA thing. It's just the staffing of sales teams is biased towards account management, highly relational people. So they look for reasons not to prospect, and they love when there's account management responsibility that needs to be done. I think some of it is sales managers that have lost sight of results and pipeline as the two first things you're supposed to look at when you're evaluating a salesperson. You don't start with activity. You start with freaking results. And the way you get results is by pipeline management, right? There are 3 verbs I like to use all the time: create, advance, and close. And if sales managers would pay a lot more attention, especially to creating, right? Are your salespeople creating new opportunities in the top of the funnel? If every week and every month we asked a salesperson, or a salesperson asked himself or herself, what did you put in the funnel this week? And what did you put in the funnel this month? Like, what's in the pipe today that wasn't there 7 days ago and 30 days ago? Everything would change in sales. We'd be totally focused on opportunity creation and then advancement, not just being busy or responding to emails. And I mean, that's as strong as I can say it. I think we just get lost and we forget the job because we're busy and we're addicted to our smartphones and we work a lot and we feel good about client service stuff, but that doesn't move the needle on new business. So that's what happens.
And we get that little dopamine hit because we feel like we did something. And so as you were going through that, Mike, the thing that came to mind for me is we as sales leaders ideally are coaching our team and helping our team improve their awareness of how they're identifying the problem, the core problem that exists inside the organization or exists for the person that we're helping solve the problem. It's not necessarily, hey, we missed our number last quarter. It's getting deeper and moving down layers below that. And we do that through the questions that we ask. And we get to the root cause, going through a root cause analysis, root cause of the problem that exists. So we ask our teams to do this for our customers. Yet how often as sales leaders do we put that same lens on our business and get to the root cause of what the root problem that we're trying to solve for and the causes associated with it? And coming back to your component around create, advance, close, it becomes really clear to say, are these opportunities that I'm creating as a new customer acquisition focused rep, am I creating opportunities? Am I advancing those opportunities, making progress, holding customer accountable, holding myself accountable? Am I actually moving to close? And if I'm not in each of those stages, it becomes really easy to identify where the coaching opportunity is.
I'm speechless. That thought process is brilliant. To take the same discovery and diagnostic approach that we do when we're succeeding with a client, when we're really working to understand their issues and their current state and their desired future state and what's in between and what are the current challenges and problems and initiatives and why are they not getting where they need to go. If we would turn that same lens on ourselves and our own sales teams, it would be incredible. I don't know why that doesn't happen. Because I mean, and here's the weird thing, Mike. I get called into companies sometimes to solve what appears to be a very complex sales problem where they've plateaued or they're stuck or they're getting commoditized and, share is down, margins down, new business is down, whatever it is. And they look at me and I always go back to the basics and I pull out my little new sales driver framework from my first book, New Sales Simplified. Yeah. I'm like, can we just talk about this for a second? Like, stop with all the craziness and let me just ask some questions. Show me the strategic target account list that all your people have that they're committed to working. Like, I want to see the actual names of the accounts that the managers and the salespeople have agreed that they're committed to pursuing new business from. Show me the list. And now let me hear your story. I want to hear your messaging. What do you say to get a meeting? What are you writing in emails? What are you leaving in voicemails when you get someone on the phone or you're asking for a referral? What's the message, right? And is it self-focused garbage or is it about outcomes that you create for clients and issues you address? And then I say, okay, show me how you get a meeting. I want to watch you prospect. What's the way you get in? And then once you get the meeting, outline for me your discovery sales call. Let me hear your phases. I want to see the probing questions. How do you flesh out objections? What do you do to define next steps? And then finally, I say, show me your stinking calendar. Show me the amount of energy being spent pursuing those target accounts on that list we talked about. And Mike, I promise you, and listeners, I promise you this, you ask those questions, you could solve almost every sales problem. Like, this is not rocket science. I don't have some MBA from some elite school. This is basic sales street stuff. Do you have a list? Do you have a good story? Who are you working? How do you get meetings? How do you conduct meetings? What kind of questions do you ask? How do you advance through a sales call and deal with objections and next steps? And then what does the calendar look like? And are you doing enough math? I mean, do you know how many sales problems I've solved asking those questions? I mean, in some of the most complex situations, because sales is simple. The business may be complicated, but sales itself is simple. And everybody wants to like make it into something tougher and more confusing, and it's not. And I think that's where people get lost.
If it was complex, I probably wouldn't be doing it. I mean, like,
neither would I. Neither would your New York public school educated guest.
There you go. I'm a kid from New York, PSA 116. So like, it just, that's the, I think that's a great thing to highlight is, simplify these things. When you add layers to the problem or to the equation, you create complexity. If you take the process that Mike just walked everybody through, you can quickly realize that, hey, these are some simple questions that you can ask inside the organization. And if for whatever reason you've got reps or members of a team or segments of the organization who are struggling answering those questions, then kind of like the SAT, you dig a little bit deeper into each of those areas and you realize, okay, here's where our problem is. This is what we need to address, and you address it there. Don't try to solve 9 problems at once. One problem at once is a good thing. And if you can demonstrate a capability to do that, then maybe move on to 2 or 3 at the same time. But let's not complicate this stuff. So, Mike, as we wrap up here, is there anything that we've not touched on, either relative to the book or experience that you have with on the 5 continents that you've spoke on and consulted? Is there anything that we've not hit on that you'd like to hit on, or is there a parting comment that you'd like the audience to take away?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple thoughts. One is I want to reiterate something we started with, because I can't say this strongly enough. Be careful who you're reading and who you're listening to. Followers on LinkedIn and likes of articles do not necessarily equate to credibility or effectiveness of the advice that you're reading. And it's weird to say that, but in today's world, you have to, because there is no barrier to entry in this space. And I see a lot of salespeople getting hurt because they believe what they read, and a lot of what they're reading isn't true. And I would just caution people to ask some really hard questions as you vet out those people whom you follow on LinkedIn and whose articles you're reading, to really understand, are there real clients and are there real sales teams and real salespeople whose careers are being transformed by the advice you're reading. Because there's a lot of money in this business, and there's a lot of sales tool vendors sponsoring a lot of things, and a lot of people who would tell you they were experts who speak for free at all the virtual online conferences. But you never hear about their clients and the teams they turn around and the impact they're making. So I just want to, I hate to sound like the old man, but there's just a thing going on right now where it's weird out there. And I think there'll be a cleansing over time as some of the fads like social selling fade away into darkness, as the reality of it never produced what it promised it would. And those who were big in the industry are often now unemployed and moving on to other things. Like, those are the same people everyone was holding up as examples just a few years ago, as they were the in thing in sales. So I would just say be careful of the flavor of the day and the bandwagon, and be really wise about who you're following and what you're doing. And I'll pause there and say that I just want to emphasize that. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be reflective and share. I wrote this book because I felt like this is the book the sales community needed right now. I wrote the book I wanted to write, and then I felt like needed that information that needed to be shared. Because those best practices in the middle chapters on how to become an opportunity creator, and those chapters of how to own your sales process to stay out of the procurement pit, and those best practices of those 2 sellers we've talked about already, that's true. And that's what I'm seeing in real companies with real salespeople. And I desperately want salespeople to do what's going to work and make them a better living and help them win more new sales. That's why I do what I do.
And Mike, there's a lot of alignment here. We talked about it just before we turned on the microphone around demystifying sales for the non-sales professional. There are a lot of people, when they hear sales, they think of a 4-letter word. They think immediately of the, do you want floor mats with this? Or do you want me to add in the coating for the paint or whatever it is? And I went the car route specifically because you had the story that you were talking about. And I forget if it was Tom or Ron in there, but the amount of preparation that went in, anticipating where things should be in order to support a customer decision-making process and anticipate where the customer is going to go, requires thought. This is on a car lot, like, requires thought, drives success, leads to positive outcomes. So stop trying to do the complicated things that you're trying to do, these quick fixes, these shortcuts that in essence will probably change over the vocabulary, at least will change over the course of the next couple of years, and get back to those basics. Go through a planning or prepare, go through a planning process, make it personal. Mike, I really appreciate the time today. Enjoyed the conversation. When people want to learn more about what you're working on and how they can access the book, where would you like to send folks?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this great conversation. I love hearing your take on sales. So I appreciate the fun dialogue. To find out what I'm doing, you can follow me on social channels at Mike_Weinberg, WEINBERG, Mike_Weinberg. And I blog, and my website is at MikeWeinberg.com.
Awesome. And we will have links in the show notes to each of these places. We'll have a link to the book. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them and let us know via Twitter or LinkedIn. Your ratings and review help people discover the podcast. Thank you for reviewing the podcast. We'll be reading reviews on a future episode. Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.